What's up, guys? Today we are going to be talking about the new Huda Beauty Creamy Palettes. I got these in PR last night and I wasn't expecting to even do this video today, but I want to get it out there. These don't launch until February 25th, I believe, so it's a little while. I think we have another like 10 days to go, but I feel like it's always good to have as much info as you can ahead of the launch. So I'm going to be doing a look with each palette, and also I'm going to be doing my comparison swatches as always, so stay tuned to the end of the video for those. But I have to say, guys, this is a really unique and interesting formula. So when I first saw the name of these, I thought that creamy was referring to the color stories, but it actually means that every shade in these palettes are cream shadows, which it's just an entire palette of all creams. I was not expecting that. There is one powder shade in each palette, and it's like this one right here in the cooler toned one, and then in the warmer one it's this shade. So these are basically just translucent. So in just a second, when we see the swatches of the palettes, you're not going to see those shades because they just didn't show up. So I basically swatched 8 shades and I tried to swatch the 9th one. It doesn't show up. So just so that you're aware, I'm not missing a shade in the swatches. That's just how it is. So I like that she gave us that option to kind of set everything down, especially for anybody who has maybe more oily eyelids and creams tend to like break up or crease on them. I like that she added that additional powder shade. So anyway, let's just go ahead and take a quicker look at these first before we get into the looks. So let's start with the Grayish Creamy Obsession. So this one is very, very cool toned. You have a nice mix of those dusty pink shades and gray and taupe colors as well. You have 3 metallic shimmer shades in this palette, one that has a little bit more glitter than the other 2, and then you have 5 creamy mattes. And I just love the color story of this one. It's right up my alley for sure because I love my cool tones. And then we have the Neutral Brown Creamy Obsession. So this one is a lot warmer toned, but it's just regular brown neutrals. You're not seeing the reds and oranges and yellows that you sometimes see in other warm tone palettes. And again, you do have 3 shimmery metallics, one of which is a little bit more chunky and glittery than the other 2. And then you have your 5 creamy mattes plus the setting shade. So let's go ahead and just get started with the demos. So I want to try the Grayish palette first, and I basically applied a full face of cooler tone products. So let me just tell you what those are really quickly. I have the Revlon blush in Rosy Rendezvous, which is the most beautiful dusty mauvey color. So I love this one. I use this a lot if I'm doing cool tone looks. And then on my lips, I'm wearing the Neutrogena Hydro Boost Hydrating Lip Shine in the shade Soft Mulberry, which again, really beautiful cooler toned berry pink. And for lip liner, I'm wearing my favorite. This one is the Lawless Forget the Filler lip liner in the shade Pink Slip. So that's what's on my face, and then I'm gonna switch it when I do the warm tone palette. So let's start out with this one. And for my crease color, I wanna start out with this dusty pink right over here. And I think these cream shadows would work best with a flatter brush instead of a big fluffy one. So I'm gonna use the Sigma E28 to pick this up. And I'm just gonna start packing this one all over my lid. Ooh, it's really pigmented. I mean, it's a light color, but it's showing up really nicely. It's also blending out really well. It's super creamy. It's not stiff. And these are supposed to be a cream to powder, so it's nothing that's gonna stay greasy on your eyes. They do dry down pretty much instantly. And really working with these, it feels basically like a powder. It doesn't feel much different. So I'm just kind of blending this one all the way up to my brow bone. It's almost the same color as my skin, it's just slightly pinker. Then next, just to deepen things up a little bit, I want to apply this gray shade right here, and I'm going to use the Sigma E24, which is very similar. It's also a flat brush, but it's just a little bit smaller. I can get a little bit more precision with this one, and I'm going to focus this gray shade mainly toward the outer corner just to add some depth. One thing I am noticing with this palette though is these colors are shearing out quite a bit. So I think anybody that has a deeper skin tone, these may not show up very well on you because they do come out very light. Granted, I'm using a lot of the lighter colors in the palette, but there are quite a few of them. There really only are a handful of darker colors, maybe 3 that I can see. That's just one thing to keep in mind. All right, next, to add even further definition to the outer corner, I think I'm gonna pick up this really deep gray shimmer shade right here. And I'm just kind of stamping this one on with my finger first, and then I'm gonna grab a brush. This is the large blending eyeshadow brush from Profusion, and I'm just gonna kind of blend the edges of this color a little bit. So adding this shade just gives the look a little bit more depth. I could have left it just the way it was and maybe just added one of the lighter shimmers on top, but if you want to deepen the look a little bit, I think this color is really beautiful. And because it's not super shimmery, when you actually blend it out, it's kind of more like a satin finish. Okay, I'm just gonna take this really pale, almost like lavender shade, and I'm gonna apply this right under my brow bone just to kind of add lift and also just to blend those crease colors a little bit more. That's really pretty. I love that it's not like a stark white shade. It has that little bit of a pink undertone. All right, next I want to use one of these shades as liner. So I'm going to pick up this really deep one down here in the bottom corner, and I'm going to use the BK Beauty liner brush. This is called the 208. And you can see it's a teeny tiny little slanted liner brush. So I'm just going to start stamping my waterline with this, and I've been doing this for a while now where I apply liner underneath my lashes first and then kind of bring it out at the outer corner where my lash line ends. Then I go back and just stamp the liner above my lash line starting at the outer corner, and I meet up with where the liner came from under my lashes, and I just connect it in a little triangle. It's a really easy way to do a mini wing with hooded eyes because it doesn't get caught in the fold since it goes under your lash line over there. All right, and then I'm just gonna go back and stamp it all the way along my lash line, very close to the lashes, just making the thinnest line all the way to the inner corner. All right, so that actually worked really well. It creates a little bit of a softer line. It's not as crisp as using a liquid liner, but I like it. I feel like it really helps to define my eye and add a little bit of length. So I'm just going to do it to the other side and add some mascara. Next, I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of that soft gray right here that I used in my crease. I'm just going to run this along my lower lash line just for some soft definition. And I'm not going all the way to the inner corner. I'm going from the outer edge to about the center. All right, so I could totally stop here and just do an all matte look and be totally done, just add mascara, and I think it just gives a really soft, pretty vibe. But you guys know me, I need to try a shimmer shade, so I really want to apply this one that's in the center right here. This looks so beautiful. And this one is kind of more like a topper shade, so I thought maybe I would just press this right into the center of my lid, just to add a little bit of sparkle, but nothing too dramatic. Yeah, this shade is definitely more on the sheer side. The other two shimmers have a little bit more pigment behind them. They have a little bit more of a colored base. This particular shade is mostly glitter. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put on some mascara. I'm using the e.l.f. lash extender, and I'll be right back. All right, so here is the finished look with the grayish palette, and it really performed beautifully. I had no issues. I thought the creams blended out seamlessly. I felt like they were almost easier to use than powder shadows because they really just blend and kind of blur your skin, and they have this really dry, moussey texture that really just floats on top of your skin. So I thought they were incredibly easy, and I'm loving this look. I don't even want to wash it off to do the other one, but we're gonna have to, so I'll just have to recreate this one another time. I really do like it a lot, and I'm loving these colors. All right, so round two, I'm gonna be applying the Natural Brown Creamy Palette, and I redid all of my face makeup. So for cheeks, I'm wearing the Airlight blush from Joa in the shade Bright Peony, which is kind of like a terracotta shade. I wanted to do everything a little bit warmer. And then on my lips, I'm wearing the Neutrogena Hydro Boost in Pink Mocha, and then the Makeup Forever Artist Pencil in Wherever Walnut. So I think when it comes to the palette, I'm gonna start out with this shade right here in my crease, the one in the center on the bottom. And I did go ahead and clean off my brush. So again, this is the Sigma E28 brush. And I'm just gonna start packing this. I'm just gonna put it all over my lid and up into my crease. And this shade is a soft, warm tan. It's about one step deeper, I would say, than my skin tone. Again, I think these do sheer out from what they actually look like in the pan. I think in the pan, this color does look a little bit darker than it appears on my skin, but it's blending out effortlessly again. I really love how user-friendly these shadows are. You wouldn't think so, and I know a lot of people are afraid of cream shadows, but if you're somebody like me who, you struggle with blending out powder shadows, sometimes they can catch or skip and drag on your eyes. These creams are just so silky and just really, really effortless. Next, I'm gonna deepen my outer corner with this deeper brown shade that's right in the center. I'm gonna pick this up on the Sigma E57 Firm Shader Brush. So this is just a flat brush. It doesn't have any fluffiness to it like the one that I just used. So I'm really just gonna use this brush to pack this color on, and then I'll blend it with a softer brush. And I'm just really focusing this color on the outer half of my eye. And I'm blending this out with the Profusion Large Blending Eyeshadow Brush. So this is a nice, soft, fluffy brush just to get rid of any harsh edges. And as you can see, that really dark shade has sheared out significantly. So these eyeshadows are definitely going to result in a very soft look. Next, I'm going to use this really light tan up here just to kind of soften the upper edge by my brow. So I'm just picking this up on the Sigma E24, and I'm just running it back and forth along the top edge of my crease color just to make sure that there's no harsh edges. And I didn't do this with the last palette, but I want to use this setting shade, which is the powder right here. And I'm just picking this up with the BK Beauty 201 brush, and I'm just gonna apply this right on top of the creams. I just want to see if it changes anything or if it really is translucent. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't show up at all. So it's not going to ruin any look that you do or change it in any way. So if you have more oily eyelids or you're prone to creasing with cream shadows, I would definitely just tap this powder right on top, like especially along the crease and areas where it's likely to break up a little bit. Next, I'm just going to pick up this deeper shimmer shade down at the bottom row. And just like with the last look, I'm going to apply this right on the outer corner just to further deepen that up, because I felt like the cream shadow really faded a lot and it's not giving me that depth that I'm looking for. So I'm just going to pat this on with my finger, and then I'm going to use that Profusion blending brush and just soften the top edge. I also want to use this really dark shade again with the liner brush, and I'm going to line my eyes the same way I did with the last look. So just running it right underneath my top lashes all the way to the outer corner, and then going along the top lashes and meeting the two together. Next, I'm just going to run it all the way to the inner corner, and then I'm just going to repeat that on the other side. All right, and then using a pointed brush from my Doll 10 brush collection, I'm going to pick up this crease shade, and I'm just going to run this under my lower lash line. So again, I could leave this just as an all matte look, or I can add a little shimmer. So I want to try this shade right here, which is kind of this warm rose gold. And I'm just going to pop this right in the center. This one also has a little bit of glitter to it, and it's more of a topper. It's not a completely opaque shimmer shade. So it really just adds a little wash of glitters. All right, so again, I'm just gonna go ahead and add some mascara, and I'll be right back. All right, so here's the final look with the neutral brown creamy palette. Again, I think it was a really effortless look. These shadows are so easy to work with. I would say just a couple of caveats with these. The first one being that I'm a little bit concerned about how long the cream shadows are going to last. The palettes do close really securely, but again, I know with a lot of the Natasha Denona palettes that I have, the creams tend to dry out over time. So that almost certainly means that these creamy palettes are going to have a shorter shelf life than if they were all powder shades. Another thing is, if you don't like toppers and glitter, you're probably not going to love these because they don't really have a lot of those traditional shimmer shades that have the full pigment. There are one or two in each palette, but that may not be enough to satisfy some of you. So you really have to be okay with both regular shimmers and glitters if you want these palettes. So those are just some quick things to think about off the top of my head. But now let's go ahead and take a look at some comparisons. Now, right up front, I just want to say that none of these comparisons are going to have the same type of formula as these. So even if the colors are similar, they're not cream shadows. All of the ones that I'm going to share are powder formulas. So right away, I think you are definitely going to be getting a different experience with these creamy palettes. But let's go ahead and look at the first one. This was probably the most requested that I had from you guys, and that is to compare these to the Pretty Grunge palette. So that's Huda's latest release, and a lot of people are saying online that these two new palettes look like a combination of just the one big one. And looking at them side by side, I agree to an extent. I think that the neutral brown one does look similar to Pretty Grunge, but the cooler toned one, the grayish palette, I don't see a ton of similarity. And I think that's because originally I thought that the Pretty Grunge palette was going to be very cool toned, when in actuality it's a mostly warm toned palette. So looking at the swatches here, I have the entire Pretty Grunge palette swatched along the bottom row, and then on top on the left I have the grayish palette, then there's just a little space, and then I have the neutral brown. So you have the cool on the one side of the screen and the warm on the other, and I tried to match up what I could from the Pretty Grunge palette, and I do think there are quite a few similar shades. There weren't a lot of exact shade matches that I could see, and I think the grayish palette does go a little bit cooler than the cool shades in the Pretty Grunge, but I definitely see the similarities between them. Another huge request I got was to compare them to the Natasha Denona Glam palette. So just looking at them side by side, again, I see a lot more in common with the neutral brown than I do with the grayish. I think even though the Glam palette has a couple of cool tone shades, it's mostly warm. So here we have all of them swatched out again. I have the Natasha Denona Glam palette all along the bottom row, and then the top row is the same. I have the grayish on the left, a little space, and then the neutral brown on the right. So there were definitely some similar shades that I could see. There were a few in the Natasha Denona Glam palette that didn't match up at all. For example, that warm yellow gold isn't found anywhere in the two new Huda palettes. And it's also worth noting that the shimmer shades in the Natasha Denona palette are all traditional shimmer shades. There's really no glitter in that palette at all. They're more subtle metallics, almost bordering on a satin finish. They really don't give your eyes a ton of impact. So some of you may prefer that, some of you may not. Next up, I had some requests to swatch the neutral brown next to the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. And between these two, I actually do see a lot of similarity. I wasn't able to match up every single shade, but I think the vibes are definitely there. It's just really a very basic brown neutral palette, and I think a lot of palettes that I have in my collection would sort of fit the bill and match really closely as well. So I really don't think that there's anything super unique about this one. I also got a request to swatch it next to the Sultry palette. So Sultry definitely has some additional shades that neutral brown doesn't have. It has that pop of matte coral, and it also has some yellow gold shades that the Huda palette doesn't have, but just swatching the ones that I could match together, I do think that the tones are really close, and it definitely captures the vibe of all of the neutrals in the Sultry palette for sure. Then when it comes to the grayish palettes, I had a couple of requests. The first one was to show it next to Petals on Point from ColourPop, and this one, I mean, it does have some similarities. It has the dusty pinks and some neutrals, but it also has those kind of seafoam green colors, and at the end of the day, when I swatched these side by side, I didn't think they were really all that similar. So I just wanted to share that. I think Petals on Point is definitely more of a pastel-y sort of palette. I also got a request to show it next to Making Mauves from ColourPop, and I actually didn't even swatch these together because when I looked at them side by side, I realized that Making Mauves doesn't have any gray shades in it at all, and the grayish palette has quite a few of them, so I really just looking at these, I don't think that they're that similar at all. Next up we have ColourPop That's Taupe next to the grayish palette, and this one I do see some similarity. While That's Taupe doesn't have the dusty or pink shades, some of the colors do have a little bit of a pinkish undertone, and again, I wouldn't say that every single shade in this palette is a dupe because it really isn't, but it definitely has a similar vibe going on. I also pulled out this Moira Silver Mist palette. This is one of their little mini palettes. I talked about this in a recent video. I really love this palette, and I felt like, again, it has that really similar vibe. One of the biggest differences with the Silver Mist palette is that it has that really beautiful deep blue shimmer, but it also has a lot of those taupey, rosy, cooler tone shades, so I think this one actually has, again, a very similar vibe going on. I also got a request to show the grayish palette next to the Huda Beauty Matte Obsessions in the cool version. And this one I also didn't swatch just because when I looked at them side by side, The Matte Obsessions doesn't have any of the grays, so I just really didn't think that they were similar enough to warrant swatching them. I think it's pretty easy to see the differences just looking at the palettes themselves. And I also got some requests to show it next to Rose Quartz from Huda Beauty. And this one definitely is more of a cool tone palette. It has the pinks, it has some of those grayish taupey shades. So I was pretty confident that this one was going to be similar. But when I looked at the swatches, I actually felt like the pinks in the Rose Quartz palette are a little bit more vibrant. They're not quite as dusty as the ones in the grayish palette. I mean, they hardly even come off as pink once they're on the skin. And I think in general, Rose Quartz is just way more colorful. It has a lot of duochrome shades, and the grayish palette is just very basic and very simple. So those were all the comparisons that were at the top of my mind, and also yours when I asked you over on my community tab. I think, you know, as far as the neutral brown one goes, like I said before, I think I could do quite a bit more comparisons because it's a basic neutral brown palette, and I probably have so many of those in my collection that would line up with this one. But again, I think the biggest difference with these two, and the thing that makes them stand out from other palettes, is that you have an entire palette of all cream shades. So it's a little bit of a different experience. I personally thought that it was really, really easy to work with, even easier than powder. But just to recap some of the downsides, I do think that creams sheer out a lot more than powders do. So it's going to be a softer look, and if you have a deeper skin tone, some of these shades may not show up that well on you. I kind of had a hard time getting them to show up on me, and I'm pretty pale. And also, again, the creams have a tendency to dry out over time. So I don't think these are going to be as long lasting as powder shadows. And again, if you're not a fan of toppers or glittery shimmer shades, then you may want to skip these as well. But otherwise, I think they're a fun and unique new idea. And with everything in the beauty industry constantly being repeated all the time, it's kind of refreshing and a nice change of pace to just try something totally different. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on these down below. Are you planning on buying one or both of them? Are you going to skip them? Let us know what you're thinking. And I just want to thank all of you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it here with me. I really, really appreciate it. If you are new here and you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you have some extra time and you'd like to watch another of my videos, I'll just put something right up here to check out next. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.